A report from the Federal Attorney General's office did note one bright spot with the Federal Protection Service. Over the past decade, it has lost just 15 weapons. Officials hope local police forces can follow their example to better secure their guns. Okay, so let's talk more about this problem with Laura Carlsen, Director of the Americas Program at the Center for International Policy. She's also a columnist for Foreign Policy in Focus, and she joins us from Mexico City. Laura, welcome.
Thank you.
So Mexico has relatively strict gun laws. Where are these guns coming from?
As in many cases in Mexico, there's a big difference between the laws, which are relatively strict, and the reality. And these guns are coming from all sides. We have, as was mentioned, this huge increase now in legal sales and imports of guns. The Mexican government has imported from the United States only some $3.5 billion worth of weapons and arms in the last 3 years alone. What's happening then is that effectively, with these rates of so-called lost or stolen arms, they're arming both sides. And it's true that these figures are probably low. There's another report that talks about 17,000 arms lost or stolen, and it's likely that that number is underreported because it's an embarrassing situation for the police forces. Now, there's also the continuing problem of smuggling from the United States and the international black market to add to that.
So let's talk about this fast and furious U.S. program sending arms into Mexico. Clearly, this was a disaster. What should the U.S. be doing to stop the flow of guns into Mexico?
Well, first of all, the United States has to have a stronger anti-smuggling program on the border because it's still not working. Fast and Furious was an extreme example of what turned out to be, since they allowed these arms to come in and then they were used in crimes, actually an official smuggling program. But the general rate of guns that are coming over the border and then are used in crimes is still very, very high. In addition to that, what's very important for Mexico, and there's a lot of figures that back this up, is to pass the kind of laws that were just rejected in the Senate a few days ago. This means universal background checks, so you know you're not selling arms to international arms smugglers. It means assault weapons ban. There's a new study that came out that correlates homicides in Mexico to the end of the assault weapons ban in the United States. So these things are very important for Mexico, and they're very important for the United States also.
And Laura, has the gun debate in Mexico generated the kind of discussion that it has generated in this country, with the two sides completely divided?
No, not in the same way. In Mexico, the big debate is whether this war on drugs that has generally militarized the country and is really the vehicle for this huge increase in importation of arms and in violence throughout the country is working or not. That continues to be a very polarized debate in which actually more than half the population believes that it is not working. So they're beginning to talk about what do you do as an alternative. Mexico now exposes the lie that more arms mean more security. In fact, what we're seeing is completely the opposite. Some of the things that they need to be doing are looking at the money laundering part of it, which has received very little attention, considering that it's clear that they're not going to be able to outshoot the criminals and the delinquents in order to end crime and drug trafficking in Mexico. They have to strangle the financial empire, and that means going after the money laundering, and yet that's not being done. And they also have to go after corruption. As was mentioned before, most of these arms that are passing from the security forces directly to organized crime are a result of corrupt police and armed forces. And until they can crack down on that, there's no assurance whatsoever that the thousands of arms that are flowing into the country won't end up in the wrong hands.
So this all comes down to money, not security.
That's right. It's a huge industry for the United States. There's no reason for them to be authorizing such high levels of weapons sales to Mexico when it faces no foreign enemy. It means that it's going to be used against their own people. in what is supposedly a battle against organized crime, and yet the United Nations just issued another report saying that Mexico is one of the highest countries in the world for extrajudicial executions. That means they're shooting people with no trial, no due process, and we don't really know if they were criminals or not. So there's a tremendous amount of human rights violations that are linked to this inundation of arms coming into Mexico now.